Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Casper. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the BPM 360 podcast. My name is Casper, and I'm joined today, as usual, with Russell. My friend, how are you? Are you outside again?
I'm outside again. I'm enjoying the spring, beautiful weather in Germany. I'm near to Kassel.
Okay.
It's really from north to south, east to west. It really is in the middle of Germany. I've just been to a real awesome event organized by this little university in Wernigerode. Professor Hans Schirul, we had him on the show.
Yeah, we had him, sure.
Yeah, and it was co-hosted by MSG, which is also a company that's especially around the team. They have very process-centric thinking. They're engaging in, so that was definitely really interesting. I had two topics. One of them was more on a unified repository in LeanIX for business transformation, so extending the meta model, and also something around artificial intelligence in the context of this EOG model that Hans has. So
had who would have expected AI to be there?
Well, there wasn't astonishing. I think it's always in these conferences. I think it's too little. Sometimes too little hands-on as well. You have shows. Yeah. But we'll dig into that later. So I'm here in the sunshine. It's Friday. It's great. But I see that what is making me super happy as well is that we have an awesome guest as well today.
Yes.
But I have not got to know her yet. So
I'll do the introductions to start with. Yeah. So indeed, we do have a guest, and we go back to the academic roots today, Russell, as we have Iris Beerepoot in the episode. So Iris, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you on the show. So just for a full disclaimer to our listeners, Iris and I know each other from the Utrecht University, and where I sometimes give guest lectures to Professor Hajo Reyers, and Iris is working also together with Hajo. And we got to know each other and met each other on a couple of occasions. And there's a couple of very interesting researches and studies that you are involved in that we're going to get to later on. But first, the main question, of course, would you please introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners? And what we would specifically also like to know is, how did you end up in the process management world?
Yeah, so I'm an assistant professor at Utrecht University. Indeed, we've met through the business process management course that I'm also involved in at Utrecht University. I am in my research mostly interested in work that takes place outside of process-aware information systems. So that's already a little bit of a sneak peek towards the research that we're talking about today.
Yep.
So my first contact with BPM, so that goes back, I think, 7 years or so, when I was doing my master's in Amsterdam. I followed a BPM course that was taught by Hajo Reyers, and I knew quite early on that I wanted to do my thesis in that area as well. So I did my thesis actually at a consultancy company that was specialized in health information systems, implementing them in hospitals and other healthcare organizations. Mm-hmm. And I did my thesis on the topic of workarounds, which was an idea by my supervisor at the time, Inge van der Weert, who is also still my colleague today. And the idea was to go to these hospitals and to look at the processes that are performed there, but especially the ways in which doctors and nurses deviate from procedure. And the idea was that we would use those workarounds, so those ingenious ways of working around the prescribed processes, as indications of processes that need changing. So there's often a reason that these nurses or doctors choose to use a workaround. There's an obstacle in the way, apparently. And we thought that it would be interesting to identify those workarounds and to analyze them in detail to see, okay, what needs changing in this process. And for me, that was super interesting. One, to get a feel of these processes in hospitals, and to to see how work takes place there and how chaotic it can be, but also to be able to give the floor to these nurses and doctors, and to see what kind of obstacles they run into and how we can improve that from a systems perspective. So my master actually turned into a PhD. I don't know exactly how that happened, but it did.
Too many workarounds. Too many workarounds that you have to work through.
I think so, yeah.
They just trapped you. Yeah, trapped you.
So we did it for most diseases. We did it in one hospital, and then in the end, we looked at workarounds in, I think, in total 7 or 8 healthcare organizations. So not only hospitals, but also medical rehabilitation centers, for example. And we kept running into those same workarounds, but also entirely new ones. And over time we were, because I was doing this mostly through observation, shadowing, doing interviews with healthcare professionals, but later on we also took a more data-centric perspective. So we tried finding those same workarounds in the data from the electronic health record systems, and we were able to do that to a certain extent. So that's also the field where we see a lot of opportunities in still. So we have another PhD student who started after me, who continued that idea of workaround mining. So detecting workarounds from data, which is pretty cool.
Wow. I mean, I need to dive in straight away because this is interesting. I mean, obviously we go way back because I think I remember even that your thesis on workarounds. But at the moment, I mean, in a hospital, not everything is captured in a system. So the main question becomes almost automatically is how can you scale that? I mean, finding those workarounds, I guess, but please tell us, would require a great deal of conversation and talking to people and trying to figure out why they do something different than the way, for instance, a work instruction or a procedure is telling them to do it. And you mentioned to a certain extent you can actually see it in the data, but how would that be scalable?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are different types of workarounds, some of which we can now detect because we've seen them once in real life by observing people. Mm-hmm. So we know that, for example, they use, a different part of the system to accomplish some task. And that we can often see in the system because different modules used. So we cannot see it from the original module, but we know now where to look. But obviously there are also workarounds that take place entirely outside of the system, or outside systems altogether. So people might use a shadow system to perform a workaround, and then obviously if we just extract data from the original system, then we won't see it. And sometimes it's simply a paper workaround. So for example, in hospitals, you have all these computers on wheels, cows they call them, which you can take from one patient to the other, and you're supposed to do your measurements at the patient's bedside, and then you register it directly into the system. Well, what you know, if you spend some time in hospitals, you probably know that nurses also walk around a lot with their notebooks and their pens, and they write a lot of things on paper. And that's really because they found out that for some tasks, it's really not handy to use a computer on wheels, because you spend a lot of time behind the patient's bedside, and they ask you all sorts of other questions, so you spend way too long there. So actually what you see is that for some of these tasks, they don't use the cow altogether, and they just leave it on the hallway. So for those kinds of workarounds where they just use paper, you will see a gap in the data. And sometimes, because we know about this from our observations, we can sort of fill in the gaps, but sometimes we just don't know. And I think that's also okay. We don't need to know everything at once, but it's already cool if we can detect some of these workarounds, and we can see how often they occur and how they disperse within the organization, and whether if we do something about it, do we see that they are no longer being used, or do they remain the same? That's already interesting for us to get an insight into.
Cool. Yeah, there's so many levels and questions that come to my mind. I don't really know where to start, but let me just try to fathom it out. First of all, I think it's super fascinating that this workaround topic, because I think, Caspar, we were talking about it not long ago and saying, yeah, so you model a process, you document a process, as Caspar insists to say, and then you're very much focused around the IT system and what actually happens in the non-exception happy flow, like scenario, and that is documented. But to get a feeling for how much actually is running by the system, or in an exception phase, or now in a workaround, that's something I think is highly fascinating, because it also shows that there's so much like theory and hypothesis around the documentation and modeling, and even sometimes the data mining, whereas it's only a very blurred picture of the reality. So I really find it fantastic that your research is really looking into the, let's say, behind the scenes of the typical documented, obvious, and assumed truth about how processes really run in organization. I think that's fundamentally something anybody doing process management really has to be aware of, and to have this as a research topic, to bring this topic up, how to deal with this fuzziness in the way you deal with the data you have, or even if you do a workshop and talk to people about the process, they'll tell you that's how it works, but they do it some way differently when it is required. So that's something I think is super interesting. So just take that, and I have another thing, because Gary Cox came up with that as well. It says, so because people want to get things done. So I think did you actually also talk about, or did you try to get into why people go to these workarounds, and if that is a point, how you can even adapt the process to make it more interesting or more viable or more, let's say, motivating to do the process properly? So what is your take on that around the topic of workarounds, why people do it, and what are the key mechanisms to actually address that?
Yeah. Yeah, so what we saw in the healthcare domain specifically is that a lot of times the behavior of nurses and doctors is really focused on giving care to patients, right? So what you see is that there's a lot of communication between different healthcare professionals. So you have different nurses who need to give that care to patients, but there are also doctors involved, there are secretaries, there are therapists, and other kinds of actors. And they all need to do their tasks before the patient can get the right care. And what we often saw is that there's also in hospitals there's quite some hierarchy, and we saw that oftentimes doctors, for example, skipped some task, and then a nurse needed to do something, something that deviated from the process to ensure that the patient was still able to get the right medication, or there was someone who did something in reality, but it wasn't recorded in the system, so that needed to happen afterwards. So actually to be able to explain such a workaround, you need to know about these different actors that are involved, and also who it was that skipped something in the process, and what the effects of that were downstream in the process. So it's actually very complex to get a feel of what happened exactly and what the reasoning behind it was. We cannot obviously know the thinking processes behind the nurses or the doctors, but oftentimes, what we saw is that nurses needed to come up with a workaround to provide the right care for patients. It wasn't because they wanted to necessarily do things quicker. Sometimes it actually took longer when they used the workaround, but they really focused on providing the right care to patients.
But that would mean, just bear with me for a second, that would mean that we're very quickly sliding into the knowledge management space, because what I guess a lot of these nurses are doing is, based on their typically vast experience, basically very quickly make the realization the doctor missed a step or forgot a step or refused to do a step, whatever is applicable. I now need to do this and this and this to make sure that the process keeps going on continuously. That is something that you also would never have documented anywhere anyway. So I think that factor will always be there, hopefully, that people still apply common sense and expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually, Casper, that's something I also wanted to delve into, because if the people are like this positively motivated, it's like water finding its way. So if the processes have any kind of, let's say, deficiencies, or there's, the bottlenecks, then maybe with this, like the workarounds are actually showing up where the process is not ideal. And they're also showing up possibilities on where to look, and maybe also just to think about, what you have to tackle to make this process work more in an orderly fashion in future. But if that is the positive, like striving, but I also think it works if if it was more a negative motivation. I'll say negative motivation of not definitely fraudulent, but just say shortcutting the effort, and which is also like an optimization of my own, let's say, target versus the company's goal, or let's say, in this case, the health of the patients. Even that, to really examine workarounds to see where is the process not watertight. Yeah, in the literal word, is definitely the way you go around continuous improvements. But here, sometimes you have like this, let's sit together and talk about what could be done. But let's say, obviously, letting people, let's say, challenge the process in a day-to-day fashion, and then looking into it, it says, it's not watertight here, we have to tidy that up because it could be non-compliant. And here, we see that the process isn't streamlined enough to support the people in achieving their goals as they could. And so it's a super valuable input for actually optimizing, streamlining processes, which I have been feeling is fundamentally, typically not methodology, from a methodology perspective, not really taken into account, it's not really looked at so much. Or what is your take on the research around this? Did you see that a lot of people are really looking at this, or was it a topic that was like created astonishment with people in the research field?
Yeah, so there are a couple of us researching this, but it's a small group for now. So I'm hoping that it's still growing. But yeah, what you mentioned is really true. So I think that this is really a continuous process, pun intended. So what I feel is the focus of most of the research is that you design a system, and if you think about it real hard up front, then it's probably going to work in practice. Well, what we saw with our workarounds research is that is not the case. So you can design a system very well at the very beginning, and nurses might actually say, hey, this computer on wheels, yeah, that must be fantastic. That's a solution to every problem that we have. But then when you start using the system in real life, you find out that there are certain things that you just couldn't predict. Things that happen in the moment that you have to deal with. So it might very well work in many situations, but in some situations you need the flexibility to deviate from the procedure. Mm-hmm. And that's what we see with these workarounds. And sometimes once you have done so once, you will use it every other time, but maybe not. And I think that's why it's so important indeed to identify these workarounds and to keep identifying them, because maybe at some point you might get rid of one workaround, but a new one might emerge. So this is really something that we think, at least, is something that organizations should do on a continuous basis, and also, yeah, maybe also increase that motivation to communicate these workarounds with the designers, with the managers who can change these systems and who can change the procedures.
So, Iris, so as a let's say, we'll be talking about like a takeaway. What are your recommendations? Does this impact standard methodologies that you would say, okay, looking at, say, continuous improvement methods like BPM and Lean and Six Sigma? Is there anything where you'd say that your research actually should have an impact on the methodologies out there to take this into consideration in a certain way. And also, especially, I'm really intrigued about this, this capturing the workaround. So, is this something where even in a system process design, there is something where you say the system designers or the people creating the software or the processes, they're doing something. They could do something better. Let's say positively, they could do something better to incorporate some of the findings of your research.
Yeah, so I don't think I would change the existing methodologies per se. I think this could very well exist as an additional methodology maybe. So indeed, one of the things that we did with our papers is propose a methodology for continuously monitoring these workarounds. And I think that works very well in parallel with the existing methodology. So do the design in the normal way, but then I don't know, just make sure that you spend one day a year on the work floor where you actually see what is happening and what obstacles people run into. I think that's already enough to get a feel of these workarounds. So that's at least what we saw. I mean, if I observed people for only one day, I would already have identified, 12 workarounds.
These are the numbers we're talking about. Okay.
No, so they're not relevant, I would say.
It's getting juicy now.
So, I'm not going to go to hospital again. He said, you do the workaround. You do. Yeah, let's skip this surgery.
So I think it also depends on the domain. I think health is also a domain where it's known for the number of workarounds that are being used, and this has to do with the emergency situations that you have there and the flexibility that you need to indeed ensure that if a doctor is in surgery, that you can still get the medication to your patient. So I do think that it's not true for all domains that you find so many workarounds, but I do think that it's definitely worth spending some time on the workflow also as a manager or as an NT architect, and just see how people interact with your system and what ingenious ways they have discovered.
And that's a good point, the ingenious way. How do you look at this around the culture? Yeah, so a lot of the times they're suggested there is one way to do things, and you comply or don't comply. It's a bit black and white about how, especially when you're coming from a process management perspective, this is how you do it, And you said theory and practically, you see the eyes rolling of the guys that have been doing it for 20 years because they say, well, you can do it like that, but sometimes that doesn't work and you have to do it differently. Have you seen, and I'm just thinking about this, so to maybe embrace this, let's say, this workaround culture, if it's positively driven, and embrace it in the sense that you even motivate people to think about their workarounds and mark them down. So like a bit of an innovation thinking around the process and saying workarounds aren't per se bad, and they can help us understand how we can do things better. So don't, let's say, hide them or lie about them, but let's say embrace them more, bring them up, even have a regular session where you say, even post them to us and say, I've realized that I'm not doing this thing as you say I should do it, but this is why I'm doing it. So that there is a bit of this people thing about it, that you even put it onto a positive, take the stigma away of, you're doing a workaround. That isn't necessarily per se bad. As you said, the motivation can be super positive, and it can also help understand things better. So have you encountered that? Is that something you've also been talking about or taking into consideration?
So I have read an article a couple of years back that I think they created a whole system for communicating these workarounds and indeed embracing the idea and allowing people to report on these workarounds and what they would have liked to see different. I don't think it works. So
okay.
There's no incentive for reporting on these workarounds, and also if I think about these nurses, they have enough to do. I don't see them going to such a system at the end of their shift and reporting on the workarounds that they used.
Yeah.
I simply don't see that happening. So I think it's really important that we, I don't know, maybe create a new profession within the hospital that actually spends time on this and to shadow these nurses and do it for them.
Yeah.
That will work much better. And also, one of the things, we haven't even discussed is that sometimes you don't even know that it's a workaround because sometimes, it's so natural for you and you don't really think about it anymore. So I think it's also really important that you have someone else who is not maybe part of the department, not part of the ward, and who is new to all of this, who is able to ask those questions that I did at the time when I was doing my observations, because I didn't know what was happening. So every time I saw something that looked out of the ordinary, I would analyze it in more detail, and then I would find out if it's a workaround or not. So maybe it's important, but
I agree. You do always need somebody to facilitate this dialogue and looking into things with an outside-in perspective. I totally agree.
I think that's also one of the reasons why it's so powerful if people that lead these kind of departments, that they spend time on the shop floor just seeing what happens in real life, which doesn't always happen. I don't see a hospital director wandering down the wards to see how nurses and other staff are doing their job, even though that is exactly what they need to facilitate as a leader. Yeah. So I like that. I wrote down workarounds. Are they bad or are they the ultimate source for process excellence? Could be a subtitle for this episode, Russell.
Well, let's see what ChatGPT has to say to that.
I got one question though on this topic before we might move on to another topic. But when you talk about hospitals, Iris, very often I have the impression that we're talking much more often about case management than we do process management. And it might not, of course, not apply to everything, and there will be a lot of processes in the hospital, but at the moment that you start mining these things and start to investigate them, how often do you run into the situation that you're actually looking at a case which has maybe the same activities, but there's no predefined order in which to do them?
Yeah, often. So indeed, this is quite a new way also to look at these at this type of information also for the nurses, but also for the doctors and for the managers. They're really not used to looking at processes in this way. They're really used to focusing on the end result for the patient. So I think they typically think in terms of this value-based healthcare approach. So really about what is the final value for the patient, which is a totally different perspective from what I take. So I really indeed look at the order of activities, and I try to figure out together with these healthcare professionals what should you do. But it turns out that it's not that very well documented. What the order is supposed to be. They really focus on the end result. We need to provide the value to the patient. So that also takes some time for me to see exactly what is the defined or the described process and how do they deviate from it.
So with the deviance in a sequence, would that be also a workaround for you, or is it something within?
Hope not. In some cases.
Well.
I mean, I've been a patient not too long ago. I had wrist surgery, and it was not really urgent or not really severe surgery, but they had to still put me down completely because my wrist needed to be completely still. And hopefully, in the procedure, they put me down first before they start to cut into my wrist. I mean, obviously there is a sequence that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I have this other case where it was about getting an appointment for a CT, and they wanted to have first the final result from the oncology meeting before they would give out an appointment. And I know there's only an overlap of something like 1 day that the actual termination of the appointment was delayed because they were still waiting for the paperwork. But that's where I would say the sequence if somebody had looked at the value of getting an appointment locked down, even if then maybe the appointment is then cancelled because it's not necessary anymore, I would have said that's something where breach in sequence, wouldn't have been quite as detrimental as having a wrist surgery, although you're awake and crying.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so what I see is that in the real world, the order doesn't change so much. So the order that is designed in that order, it also takes place. But I do see differences in ordering, in registering it in the health information system. Okay. And so sometimes there's already medication being ordered for a patient who has not even formally admitted yet, which takes care of.
Well, that's coming down to my case. Yeah. Okay.
This opens up another can of worms. This is Pandora's box, because that would mean that if you would rely solely on the mining results, you would actually see the way it's been registered rather than it's actually been executed.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important to know the difference between the real world and the event data. We actually, so I'm now showing the title of a special issue that we have coming up, which is actually about the mismatch between the real world and event data, because I think we don't pay as much attention to this within our process mining field as we should do. So indeed, if we do see in the data that medication is being ordered before the patient is being formally admitted, we should already think about, okay, then probably this data is not correct, and there's a difference between what is happening in real life and what is in the data.
But in SAP, I always know this is the one case where you have like the invoice and the goods. No, you have the goods receipt, and then they create the purchase order. So you're going, that's a classic, isn't it?
But the difference here is that SAP is a system in which you both execute and register at the same time. The registration happens as a result of your execution, while in the system of a hospital, it's typically more a physical. Sometimes it's a physical action that you then register afterwards in the system, and there's a disconnect. In SAP, there is no disconnect. You hit post or save. That log entry is created.
That's a good point, and it definitely is the criticality of timing is supposedly a different one than sometimes in the supply chain.
And this happens, of course, also outside of hospitals. I mean, if I am a contractor who is, I'm installing glass fiber in the sidewalks everywhere on behalf of a telco company. I'm doing physical work, and then at the end of the day, I'm probably going to register everything in a system somewhere. And if you do mining on that, you would only see the registration process, basically, but not the physical process. So I think, Iris, that is indeed the difference between event log and the real world that you mentioned.
Exactly. Yeah, I also need to think about my own processes as an academic. So, for example, we are currently teaching the BPM class to master students, and they submitted group assignments to us, and then we first do the assessment in an Excel file before we actually transfer it to the learning management system. So if you would then mine the learning management system, it's not actually wrong. It's just one way of doing it. But if you would then mine the learning management system, you would think that we only did the assessment after 3 weeks, while we actually were much sooner with that.
So that's a classic workaround, I think you were doing there. That's a classic workaround. So tell me your motivation for this workaround. And then Excel. Excel, we love it, don't we?
Yeah. We all love Excel. Yeah, absolutely.
The LMS, I guess the LMS system is such a pain to work with, and to get the data structured in an orderly fashion before somebody is then damned to sit down and punch it into the LMS system. Yeah. That's the motivation. Give that as feedback to the LMS guys.
But I must say it also has disadvantages, right? There's also another layer of errors that might occur.
Yeah, totally. For sure.
In that transferring from Excel to Blackboard, you can make mistakes. And that's the same thing that we see happening with some of the workarounds in the healthcare domain.
Good example. Yeah, like that
if you
example.
first write it down on paper and then transfer it to the system, you might miss something.
It sounds a bit like waste if you have an additional step in Excel before you actually put it in the destination system. Well, anyway, I mean, there might be good reasons for it.
Yeah, but there's two aspects. So fundamentally, I think these let's say questioning the results of process mining is a big topic. You know, putting it into the right context, validating the results, something always been a big topic. But then also just bringing this additional dimension of, yes, maybe you're measuring it, but maybe that's not the reality you're measuring. That makes it really, I'm not saying bizarre, but it makes it, you know, even more scary sometimes how fast we believe in the data that is punched out and presented to us.
True.
And to always even question what you get in let's say in such a digital world. So that's the one dimension. But I definitely think that as a challenge to process design, what you were saying about the workarounds, I think you meet them all over, and it must be a super challenge for people that are designing like a user interface and providing apps and optimizing, let's say, also the processes, is to really dig in, how can I really provide an experience that will keep people from having to do workarounds, yeah? And I think the bizarre amount of Excel applications, every one of them is a workaround. So I look at these you know, this horrendous amount of Excels that I always despise, and I say, nah, you have to get into the system. I see them with a different light now. I see each one of them as a workaround where somebody is positively intrigued to somehow get his work done, but the system and the process isn't really letting him do his job as he wants to. So definitely that's changed my view on that, Iris. Thanks.
Cool. Listen, from a completely different topic, just change of pace. Iris, I have to highlight that. A couple of weeks ago, or during the last couple of months, you remodeled your home.
For the last couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, the last couple of years actually. And you did a very entertaining series on LinkedIn on how that relates to process management.
Yeah.
I built my own house twice now in my life. I can very much relate to the pain that you're going through, but can you walk us through what made you, first of all, what made you decide to do that, and what kind of things that you learned from it? Because I think this is going to be very recognizable for our listeners here.
Yeah. Yeah, so I bought the house in 2019, I believe, so quite a while back. I think just like the two of you, probably you see processes everywhere, right? So you buy a house and then...
It's a curse and a blessing.
Yeah, so you see all sorts of things. So you see repetition happening, you see different actors that are being involved, you see things that go wrong. At some point in time I thought, okay, maybe I should write these things down. And in the meantime, I was also getting involved with the BPM course at Utrecht University, and I was thinking that actually for each of the chapters in the Fundamentals of BPM book, the book that we use, I could probably reflect a little bit on what happened in my own home renovation. So I started doing that, and I started just preparing some slides for the students in our course. And I did that for, I think, 2 or 3 years that I reflected on it every week. And then I actually, for this year, for the first time, I wrote it down. And I thought, okay, let me share it with the rest of the world. And it's very cathartic. So it's really interesting to reflect on what happened and what I might have done differently. So, for example, I have a chapter on qualitative analysis, about my toilet renovation going wrong, and the plumber who didn't communicate very well with me, and the other way around. And I also, it allows me really to reflect on things that I think we can pay more attention to. And one of the things is also this idea of just not having data about these processes. So what we just talked about with just some processes that don't take place within a system, or some tasks within the process that don't take place in a system. How can we still get a feel for the project or for the process? And for that chapter, so for process discovery, I actually did something different. So what I did is I watched a couple of episodes of BBC's Grand Designs. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
We are.
I just noted down every time someone did something. So when the owners of the house bought the plots, when work stopped because of the COVID crisis, when I don't know, they started cladding the facade. Every of the activities I recorded it in the form of some sort of event log, and then I actually used it for process mining.
Oh, cool. I mean, the analogy between building or renovating a house and BPM is one that I use actually quite often, because as you can imagine, when I work with clients, some of them still use tools like Visio to record their processes or document them, or actually you draw them in Visio because that's what you do. And I always say this, at the moment that you, and you might have that same experience, Iris, at the moment that you start building a house or remodeling it, the first person that you typically meet is an architect. And then the architect makes beautiful drawings about, or a sketch on how your house is going to look like, and maybe some floor plans. And if you would use that to build your house, to the contractor, they're absolutely useless. Because they need, well, construction drawings, which are basically process models, real models. And if you take that a little bit further and say, well, at the moment that your house is ready, you're going to live in it. So you're going to execute your processes, which is the analogy. You're not going to look at the construction drawings every day. True. You probably will be looking at the manual that comes with the stove and your central heating system and the air conditioning, so you know how to operate them, which are your work instructions. But at the moment that you need to drill a hole somewhere, and I tested that for you, drilling a hole into an electric line is not funny.
No.
It's a bit of a shocker, literally. So you want to know, where are my electrical lines, and that again is your construction drawing. So that's why that appealed to me so much. That series is, there is a very strong analogy between the two.
Yeah, indeed. So I also, in one of the chapters, I also reflect on this similarity between building plans and process models. So one of the first things that I did when I bought the house was go to the local archive, where they had these building plans of I think 1933 when the house was built, but also in the 70s somewhere when they rebuilt part of the house. Mm-hmm. And I find it so interesting indeed to see also how the house has changed. And I think, you have something similar with process models, that you can see the history of the process and how it changed over time. And I think there are many similarities between building plans and process models. So a building plan also serves as a communication tool to identify problems, to ensure that everyone is on the same page. It allowed me to show to the plumber, this is where I want my toilet to be, so that they know, okay, this is where I need to put the waste pipes. But also that you have these conventions or these symbols. So the electrician knows exactly where to put my lights because I use these conventions of a building plan. So there are many similarities. Also, even that the fact that building plans are not always followed. We just talked about workarounds. Well, for building plans, I can assure you that the electrician and the plumber also didn't always follow my plan, and that leads to problems. So I think it's a great analogy. Yeah,
because you're the only one with the end-to-end view, actually.
Yeah,
the plumber and the electrician only see part of it.
But there's one thing about, let's say, building a house, because I guess Casper's built 2, so that's already quite a lot for normal people.
True.
But it's something and typically, especially when you're talking about process mining, you're talking about the best case processes that are repeated, let's say, 100 times a day over years, and then you can really dig into the data. And what I see is with this building, let's say, process of building a house, it's more like, say, product development. And what we see here is that that they always finish up saying, okay, we have certain tasks that have to be done, but we can't predetermine in which sequence they happen. But all of them have to happen before we achieve a certain milestone, and then we move forward. Yeah, and that's why I think the process you went through building the house is much more related to, say, like the classical product, let's say, development as scenarios we see, where you have to live with a certain fuzziness, where coming from an old process management perspective, you said, I want to have an orderly like sequence, but then the paperwork isn't there, and or some things are dependent on it. You can't say get the plumber in before you don't have, say, certain piping done, yeah, and then you can't finish off do the wallpaper before the walls are there. So there's some obvious dependencies, but on the other hand, there's some that can. Where you just have to live with whenever it happens, whenever he turns up, and managing that, it gives an extra layer of complexity and unsecurity to processes in that field. And I think that's where, if you only build the first time, say, the architect has done hundreds of houses, he's kind of relaxed, he knows it'll work out sometime, and if not, well, it's your house, isn't it? Yeah. But as a let's say end consumer of the house, and the person really looking end to end, paying the bill at the end of the day, it's terrible. And I mean, it's terrible to live with this uncertainty. I think architects live with it all day, and then they just knock on another 10 million on the price if the railway can't be built in time because there's some fog living around the corner, why they have to say rehibernate him or something like that, rehabilitate him. But that is, I think, really fascinating. I think also about the blog that you wrote about it, because it's really we all want to have structure and an orderly setup to be able to deal with this happening, and you want to get it done in time, in budget, and you see things that are not working out as they are. Yeah. So I think process management is great, try to deal with it, but ultimately there will always be this big area of workarounds and, let's say, undefinable sequence of things happening that are out of our control.
And what is interesting is that when you ask someone who built a house or who renovated a house, I think they will all tell you that they want to do it again, not because they liked the process so much, but because they now know how to do it better. And I think that's agrees with me. Because
I totally
now
agree.
you know what the right order of things is, or at least you think you do. So the second time probably you will still make mistakes, but every time you will get better with it.
And I think they normally say that you need to build a house 3 times to get it right. And the first time that we built a house was more like project build, so we had limited influence, but we still had to do things ourselves once it was delivered, like putting in the floors, the kitchen, stuff like that. The second time we actually, we also outsourced it to a contractor, but it was from day one, it was not project build, it was a custom build. And that makes it, and then we stopped earlier and I did much more myself in the end. And if I should do it now, because simply I'm like 15 years older, now I would just outsource it completely, and I would just I would even outsource the moving into the house actually if it was up to me. No, but you're right. You learn, and you always tell yourself, I now know how to do it better, and I think that applies to people in their work as well. Although the only thing is that, like Russell said, you execute your process at your job a couple of times a day or quicker than that you typically build a house, which you do once or twice in your life. But anyway, I mean, I think that was an interesting thing just to mention, because I really like that series, to be honest, because it was recognizable for me in this case. There's one last thing, and before we run out of time, because this has been so much fun that time flies. There is this one article that you published recently, Iris, on LinkedIn, and I need to read it from the screen because it's so fresh. It's called "From Event Logs to Improved Teamwork: What Process Mining Can Teach Us About People." And the reason why this struck me a little bit is because process management is very often perceived as being, let's say, a bit cold and distant and impersonal. even though the work is typically executed by people, if it's not automated. So whenever we have a chance to relate it back to people and behavior, we jump on that in this podcast.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about what you researched and together with Niels from Hasselt University and what you found?
Yeah, so that's actually quite a paper that is long due, I'll say. So we started this, I think, over 3 years ago, Niels and I. And we wanted to do a study on what is happening in the process mining field at the moment around the mining of human resources. Because the process mining field really started from the idea of mining the control flow, the order of activities, but we have seen over the years that a lot of cool stuff is happening around providing insights about human resources. So not only about computers doing things, those kinds of resources, but mostly about human resources and how can we allocate them better to tasks that they enjoy and that they're good at, but also how do what kind of handoffs do we see within the organization. And there are a lot of use cases that we see emerging. So it started with this idea of social network analysis based on event data. Also, resource allocation has deserved a lot of attention. But now we actually see new use cases such as workaround mining, which we do ourselves, but also something that we call preference mining, things that people prefer to do. And how can we build better teams? How can we build teams that function better and that provide better results? So what we did in that study is really try to give an overview of the use cases that are there. And also for each of the use cases, we show one question that you might ask with the techniques that we have currently. And I think that's also interesting for organizations to look into and to see, because I think there's a lot happening at the moment in the process mining area, and it can be quite overwhelming for organizations. But if they have particular questions in mind and they want to know about how they can build better teams and how they can better allocate resources to tasks, I'm hoping that our framework can also help a little bit in that. And in the end, we also tied it to the organizational behavior model from Robbins and Judge. So we also mapped all the use cases to that framework. So you can see, for example, what can we do as an organization to get insight into team processes or team composition, team effectiveness. And we also were able to highlight a couple of potential new cases that we might pay attention to. So what we identified, for example, was whether we can maybe use process mining to analyze job crafting, which is from another discipline, actually. They're interested in that. But also detection of social loafing was one of the things that we identified. So social loafing is when you have someone in the team who skips all the tasks and
let the others do the job.
Let the others do the job.
Piggyback.
That might also be something that we might actually identify with process mining.
So when you talk about team composure, what elements do you take into consideration, or what do you think you can deduct? Is it like a profile, an ideal profile, or like a mix of profiles, and what what dimensions are you allowed to tap into when you're trying to characterize the team composure? I'm really intrigued by this topic.
Yeah, so what we have seen is that over the last couple of years there have been techniques developed around resource utilization, but also resource availability, resource assignment, but also, for example, resource role identification. So can we see from the data which roles we have in our organization and within our team, and how can we ensure that everyone is doing what they're supposed to do? Identification of similar resources. So those kinds of use cases we have identified, which I think together give quite a nice overview of how teams are composed and how you can improve that composition.
So does it go in this direction? Because I was reading about, sometimes, this is not like necessarily scientific on that level. So say if you have a team and you have like a mix of females in it versus pure men, it's more, they're more efficient or they're more effective. A mix of age, or are these the dimensions you're looking at, or is there how do I understand, like, say, what traits you go for in characterizing a persona in a team, and then judging over the sub of persona with their certain, like, let's say, characteristics, whatever they are, to say that's a good team or a bad team. So what do you dig in there? I mean, just
yeah, so
really interested in this, so just to understand it more.
Yeah, so we would actually be very interested in analyzing these personas more, because that's also one of the things that my PhD student is very interested in, to try to identify these different personas within an organization. Unfortunately, within research, we don't typically have the pleasure of doing that, because that's actually that gives a lot of information about individuals, and that is typically something that organizations don't like so much.
So ethically, you have a restriction on going in too much into the detail of the composer.
Yeah, so what you see with the techniques that have been developed so far, it's mostly focused on anonymous resources. So we don't know who they are, whether they're male or female, how old they are, things like that. But we know what their history is. We know what they have done before in the process, and based on that we can identify their roles or their preferences, things like that.
Okay, so I think it's super interesting, but definitely on the borderline to always make sure that you're on an ethical level of, based on any prejudice that could kind of like fall in that direction of how the patterns of behavior could be misused, just if you want to say, or can used or misused to somehow kind of like compartmentalize, or let's say to manifest certain prejudices even. Yeah. So I think that's super interesting. But ultimately, that's always the thing about on when you go down to a personal team level, is that that there are certain associations that are too easily generalized, interesting, super interesting, but also I can imagine very touchy also to get into that topic.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm sure that we can talk hours more on this. Unfortunately, we don't have hours more, Russell. We've come to the end, unfortunately. Yeah, already.
But can I have one last question?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So I've seldom really talked to somebody that really has had some really fascinating research topics. So that have been where I said, oh, this is fundamentally interesting from a, let's say, even research perspective. It has the depth that also goes beyond, let's say, touching a tool or something like that. So I'm really super happy about what we talked about. So is it that your future lies in research? Is that where you're heading? That you're academic and that's the path you're going, or is it something where you say, industry, this is like something, you started off with a master, now you're assistant professor, but whoever knows? Or is it like, so you found your passion and that's where you're heading?
I have definitely found my passion in academia, but I must say that I really enjoy things like this. So I also am very happy to have such a close connection to Caspar, and that we see each other on occasions like these, and that we're also able to make a bridge between academia and practice, because that's also for our research super important. And for us, it's essential to have those connections to industry so that we can do our case studies and that we can actually display or demonstrate our techniques. So it's not so much that I completely say goodbye to practice, but I think it's vital for academia as well.
Absolutely.
And I hope in future not just only keep in contact with Casper.
So Russell, there's a good way. There is a small conference typically happening somewhere in September or October. It's called the BPM conference. It's going to be in a very pleasant location this year.
Yeah.
Are you going to be there, Iris?
Definitely.
I'm sure you are. Yeah,
Sure.
I'm going to be there. Russell, you need to be there as well. You're going to be more of these type of people because it's a very interesting community.
Great.
Having said that, Iris, can I thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
And we're going to be hearing more from you, I'm very sure. And Russell, of course, cool that you were here too, as usual. And let's enjoy the weekend. So thank you very much.
You too.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.